see here. Okay, media assets. Hey guys, we're live. I got one of my favorite guests with me. I have with me James Bartley, who I got to meet in person. We'll talk about that. I'm going to play the show. We'll get started. It's going to be an amazing show. And then I always just hit this every time, guys. I hit this subscribe button, Just remember to subscribe, whether you're on YouTube or Rumble. Remember to hit the notification bell so you know when I go live, and hit the thumbs up, on Rumble and on YouTube. It makes a big difference, honestly. And my guest is none other than today. I always call him one of the best UFO researchers in the field, honestly. He's one of my favorites, and it's James Bartley. James is the host of the Cosmic Switchboard. He's a veteran UFO researcher, experiencer, Milabs, and investigator. His abduction encounters from childhood onwards propelled him into decades of study into ufology, reptilians, and military abductions. Today, we're actually going to be touching on Rendlesham Forest a little bit, which is interesting. He has a background in military history, intelligence operations, and counterintelligence. James explores the hidden layers beyond the New World Order, globalist agendas, corporate and financial control systems, and their intersections with the occult. He coined the concept of Reptilian Overlordship to describe the regressive entities that manipulate humanity from beyond the veil. Through his research, it shows it's not only reptilians, but a broader coalition of negative beings influencing Earth. His work connects old school ufology with the new, hard-hitting information about geopolitics and extraterrestrial agendas. And with all that said, I'd like to give him a big warm welcome back to the show. James, thanks so much for coming back on, man. How are you?
Pretty good, Robert. How you doing?
Good. I'm excited for this.
Me too. Just quick clarification. I'm a student of intelligence, counterintelligence. I worked in communications for the Navy. Although, having that background, doing all that research, I was a lot more familiar with the information crossing my desk than other people. So I just wanted to clarify that. I was sheep dipped into this MyLab program by elements of naval intelligence, though. That's for sure.
Yeah. Do you feel like that the alien abductions came first? Like, do you think alien contact came first and then the MyLabs, or was it always MyLabs?
I think so. I think so. But they were onto my bloodlines through my father, his involvement in the Navy, Brown Water Navy, Vietnam, and also I found out long after the fact, that he was pulled in much against his will into intelligence work. So, yeah, they must have known about my bloodline and my DNA profile because of the access to my medical records. Because when you're a dependent for the military, you're taken typically to military hospitals. So they would have had access to anything they needed about me.
Wow. And today we were going to get into Rendlesham Forest a little bit. Like, where does that start off with you and your research into that?
Well, the first time I ever heard about Rendlesham, like so many others, and it was a watered down version of what really happened, and that was intentional, and I'll get into that. I was watching the great old show Unsolved Mysteries. Many of your older viewers will remember that.
I remember. I used to watch it all the time with Robert Stack, right?
Robert Stack, and there were other shows in that time frame, In Search of, with Leonard Nimoy, etc. But Unsolved Mysteries did a segment on Rendlesham Forest, and I was just coming to grips with my own UFO experiences at the time. So when I saw this segment, of course they omitted Larry Warren in this segment, but I saw enough that intrigued me. It was involving an American Air Force base in Suffolk County, England, in the Rendlesham Forest, called RAF Bentwaters, Royal Air Force Bentwaters, and the twin base next to it, RAF Woodbridge. And what many people didn't know, in fact it was kept secret for a long time, was first RAF Woodbridge, and then in 1979, the nukes were transferred from Woodbridge to RAF Bentwaters, and the Bentwaters became perhaps the largest repository of tactical nuclear weapons in Europe at that time, unbeknownst to the British public and to large segments of the British government. So this series of events occurred right there amidst this nuclear depository area, and that alien presence in Rendlesham Forest had probably been there for centuries, in my view, if not longer. And the segment started out on Unsolved Mysteries about these Air Force security patrolmen who became concerned about these lights in the forest. At first, they thought it was a light plane that had crashed in the forest, so they were sent out to investigate. And this would have been John Burroughs, I believe, the first night. And he went out there, and they saw these lights, these bright lights, bright red lights, maneuvering through the trees in the forest. And to fast forward the story a little bit, they came back, reported that, and then the next series of nights was when things really escalated. If memory serves, on the second night, Bonnie Tamplin, who many of us who've been deeply involved in this subject only found out about recently, her story has emerged. She was a security officer, a patrol person there. She was driving her Air Force service car between the two bases, Woodbridge and Bentwaters, alone by herself when she was suddenly run off the road by a glowing red sphere. Her car crashed into a ditch. She got out in a state of panic, understandably. If memory serves, she fired her service weapon at the red sphere. They sent out a team to go bring her back. When they brought her back, she was basically in a state of hysteria, understandably, and she was saying, basically screaming that she wasn't going to go back out there. One of the things about this documentary that I'm on, and also many other people are on, is the producer and director Dion Johnson did a great job of getting all these firsthand interviews and did a great job with these reenactments. Excuse me. So they showed the Bonnie Tamplin incident when she was run off the road by this glowing red sphere. And if memory serves, Larry Warren happened to be at the office when they brought her back. And Bonnie was understandably hysterical, vowed she would never go back out there. They had to do something with her. Eventually, I think they transferred her off the base. And since then, she's she's kept a low profile, hasn't wanted to enter the fray, so to speak, and be interviewed or be a part of the documentary, understandable. And then you go to the third night. This would have been December 28th, 1980. And by now, the base was pretty much on high alert because of what had been happening the previous nights. Larry Warren, Airman First Class Larry Warren, was pulled from guard duty and told to join a vehicle convoy. They left out. They took the east gate out into the forest, and they drove to a staging area where Larry Warren and also, if memory serves, Steve Longero, another witness, were trying to set up these light alls, these big light, uh, beacon things. Basically, they kept trying to fill it up with diesel fuel, and the diesel fuel was overflowing. But
Why were they doing that, James? Why were they filling up the light?
My guess is they wanted to, like, similar to other scenarios when there was a landed craft or a crashed craft, they wanted to illuminate the area with these big light alls. But try as they might, they couldn't get these light alls to work for some reason. Go figure, right? So anyway, Larry is at the staging area, the so-called staging area, with a number of other Air Force personnel, and then they go out through the forest and they get to a clearing. This clearing, turns out, was called Capel Green, is what the locals have noted as. When Larry gets out there, there's a strange green mist that's right over the clearing floor, so to speak, and everyone's standing around it. They're looking at it. There are two cameramen filming this. So that tells me one of two possibilities. Either in anticipation of something happening based on what happened the two previous nights, and I skimmed over a lot of detail. You can find a lot of that detail that's come out because they've systematically made a point of overemphasizing, in my view, the first couple of nights and de-emphasizing purposefully what happened the third night. So either they anticipated something was going to happen. So they prepared not only disaster preparedness teams, but also movie camera units and video units. And back then in 1980, the video technology, as you know, was very large and very bulky. It stood out very clearly. There was also a couple of English bobbies, constables there taking photographs. And it was Colonel Halt who has done his level best to minimize the real nature of the events, has slandered Larry Warren over and over. Larry Warren is the only witness who has taken a polygraph test and has passed with flying colors. You will see that in the documentary. Anyway, back to the story. Now there's about 40 or 50 Air Force personnel at this clearing. There's a strange, mysterious, glowing mist on the ground in this place called Capel Green. So either they had the camera crews there in anticipation of something happening, or it's also possible, based on what we know that's gone on other bases, that there is some degree of collusion between the aliens in the underground base there, because I'll get into that aspect of the story as well, and elements of the surface military corporate operation, because it turned out the Department of Energy had a presence there of all entities as well. We know the Department of Energy has been deeply involved in UFO research and back engineering. So it's also likely possible that some degree of collusion between elements of the deep black military and the aliens had taken place beforehand, letting them know there would be an incident there, hence the presence of the camera crew. Anyway, they're standing there, they're looking at this mysterious glowing fog on the ground, this glowing mist. Staff Sergeant Adrian Bustinza actually tripped and he fell down, and in bracing his fall, he put his hands down and through that strange glowing mist. And to this day, he's having problems with his hands. Some form of radiation had contaminated his skin, and to this day he has problems with his hands. There was a number of the eyewitnesses there on site at Capel Green who developed personal maladies, illnesses, radiation poisoning, retinal burns because of what happened next. What happened next, according to Larry and others who were there, was this, once again, a red sphere, which has been seen by many witnesses in that forest. That forest is a very dark, very metaphorically dark, negatively energized place. And stories abound going back centuries of witchcraft, of all kinds of weird Hansel and Gretel type stuff going on in that forest, right? So here comes this glowing red sphere. It flies over. At first, Larry thought it was an A-10 Thunderbolt coming in for a landing, but it wasn't. And then it came over and it hovered directly above the glowing mist, and then it exploded in a soundless explosion. And it was so bright that Larry and some of the other witnesses suffered retinal burns. It's all documented in medical records. And when the light cleared, in its place was this structured craft. If you see the promotional poster and advertisements for Capel Green, that was a very good depiction of the craft that the eyewitnesses had seen. It was delta shaped, kind of pyramidal, had, memory serves, had some kind of markings, symbols along the bottom of the craft, and they were all standing there transfixed. Now, here's where the high strangeness kicked in. Many people that have had encounters with ETs and UFOs, myself included, have described what Jenny Randall's longtime British researcher referred to as the Oz effect. In other words, high strangeness. And high strangeness really began to kick in at this point because something was done. The presence of this craft had somehow altered the atmosphere, had altered the very nature of reality at this site in Capel Green. Larry says that when people would take a walk, and not only when they would take a walk, but everything slowed down as if they're walking through quicksand, walking through molasses. and he noticed that the shadows were doing odd things. Like the Air Force personnel would take a step, and then the shadows, their shadows, would a fraction later would take a step. So the movement of the person casting the shadow and the shadows were not in sync, right? The shadows were actually there was a fractional time lag between the movement of the personnel and the shadows moving. So you were having weird things like that. The deputy wing commander, Colonel Gordon Williams, later became a general, was present at the site, which, and again, it makes me wonder, were they expecting something, right? Did they have a meeting planned? And this is me talking. This is not Larry Warren. This is not any of the other witnesses that were involved. I'm looking at this from the perspective of someone who's done a lot of research about underground alien bases and underground military bases in general, because we know in many other air bases and military facilities, both in secure areas on the surface of the base, secure remote reservations, and also underground, there has been this ongoing interaction between non-human beings and deep black elements of the military and corporate elements, let's say. This happens at Edwards Air Force Base, it happens at China Lake, happens at Area 51, etc. Dulce, known as Section D. So I'm looking at it from the perspective that perhaps an agreement had been made, hence the presence of the camera crew and Colonel Gordon Williams, the deputy wing commander, excuse me, I'm getting his titles mixed up. So what happens is Larry is standing within touching distance of the landed craft. Staff Sergeant Adrian Bustinza is right alongside of him. And what they see is, and they did a great job, Dion Johnson did a great job in the reenactment of this. These strange illuminated bubble-looking thingies came out of the back of the craft, floated towards the front, and this bubble separated into 3 separate illuminated bubbles, and inside each one of them was an entity, a small entity. This is routinely left out of all these accounts. All these other people, Jim Tennyson, John Burroughs, especially Colonel Halt, none of them talk about this, and all of them, well, not all of them, but some of them, certainly Colonel Halt, have jumped on the relentlessly let's troll Larry Warren bandwagon. In fact, Colonel Halt is in bed with all these trolls who've incessantly attacked Larry over the years. Now, it's quite unbecoming to me as a retired Air Force colonel that he would be spending time with all these known vicious trolls. The troll variety in England is particularly venomous, especially as it relates to this particular incident. So, and it must be understood, Larry is not the only one who's described what's happened, what's going to happen next, but he's gone out on the limb and he's stuck to his guns, and he said this from the very beginning. I first met Larry circa 92, 93 at a lecture he gave at the San Diego UFO Society. That's where I first met Larry. And his personal manager at the time, and I talked about this in a documentary, was a government agent who had been sent into his life to cause chaos and disruption, none other than the late and unlamented Russ Estes, a known government military intelligence agent who since passed away. Later on, he teamed with, of all people, the other guy that was part of the Donald Schmitt team. Donald Schmitt, I consider one of the great researchers of all time. But at the time, and I'm not going to even delve into Donald's feelings about all this, but at the time, his partner was Kevin Randle, and Kevin Randle had since morphed into a psychologist and alien abduction debunker. Go figure. And who did Kevin Randle team up with? None other than the aforementioned Russ Estes, right? So, alien abduction debunker Kevin Randle, formerly a Roswell researcher, who teams up with Russ Estes, another documented government agent, and then Russ Estes, of all people, winds up being Larry Warren's friend, right? and he was there to cause chaos and disruption. Anyway, getting back to the story, this bubble separates into 3 bubbles, illuminated bubbles. There's an alien inside each one, and then Colonel Gordon Williams stands in front of these aliens, and they kind of look at each other. And at that point, the lower ranking personnel, including Larry, were told to get out of the area. So Larry and others went back to what was known as the staging area, where he'd been witness. Steve Longero, I'll tell his story in a moment, had seen him prior to all this at the staging area, and in fact helped him, like I said earlier, with the light all. So that was at least another person who can claim definitively that Larry was there. The stories about Larry are just so absurd to the point where they're saying he was never even in the Air Force. When you can see his documentation, you can see his photographs with his graduating class at Lackland Air Force Base, right? The amount of abuse Larry has received from the so-called UFO community is unprecedented in my view, right? So Larry goes back to the clearing, and then he suffers missing time and wakes up in bed. Now, what happened after that, the aftermath of that, was just important because Larry had gone off base and tried to make a phone call to his mother to tell her what happened. You remember in the old days, we had to like ask the operator on a payphone to reverse the charges if call collect. Remember that?
Yeah, I remember that.
Younger people wouldn't understand, but that's what we used to have to do. We have to carry change in our pocket, especially in the UK where the calls last like 10 seconds. You have to drop some more coinage in. But anyway, excuse me, he manages to get through via the operator to his mom. His mom answers the phone. Her mom's friend is present in the living room when Larry's mom answers. So she was an eyewitness to this as well. Larry was able to mention, before he was cut off, that, Mom, a UFO landed, near the base, right? Suddenly, the call was cut off. Larry dials back to the operators as what happened, and the operator said, you were cut off from inside of the base. So from that moment, I think Greg Battram, another eyewitness, was alongside Larry waiting to make a phone call as well. And Greg Battram, if memory serves, was also a witness to these events. We don't know his whereabouts. We don't know if he's passed away or not. The last we heard, if memory serves, he was living in my old stomping grounds, Santa Cruz, California, somewhere, right? So Greg Battram was there waiting for his turn to use the phone when this incident happened. And thereafter, Larry had identified himself inadvertently as being a quote-unquote whistleblower. And this factors in as an important aspect, because what's going to happen next, many of us in the Milab off-world program field have gone through similar crap that what happened to Larry. And this is back in December 1980. So like a day or so later, and afterwards, Larry and there was like 40 or 50 personnel out in that clearing at Capel Green that witnessed this, okay? And a lot of them were in a state of shock. Then there was debriefings, elements. There was people there from the Armed Forces Security Agency, which is a field operational unit of the NSA. There was also a captain in the Office of Naval Intelligence who took part in these debriefings and made the personnel sign these non-disclosure statements. And the naval officer said, you guys, in so many words, you guys got to keep your mouth shut because bullets are cheap, right? So they were all threatened in mass, and they were threatened individually. And so what happened was Larry and Adrian Bustinza, who was also there, and keep in mind, Adrian Bustinza, Larry Warren, and Linda Moulton Howe did a three-way telephone conference, and it was recorded, and Adrian Bustinza essentially confirmed what Larry had said, that there were aliens present at the Capel Green encounter. Thereafter, Adrian Bustinza went down through a lot of harassment. So much harassment that he had all this information, Bustinza did, audio tapes because there was all this communications going back and forth between the command center and all the different people in the field and what have you. All that was recorded. and eyewitness testimony, written documentation, what have you. Adrian was so stressed out from being harassed, he built a small pit in his backyard, put all the documents and the audio tapes into it, and burned it up, right? Unfortunately, that's what happened, but I understand what the guy was going through. And for a long time, he remained under the radar until pretty much he surfaced that time with Larry and Linda Moulton Howe, and he essentially confirmed what Larry said, that aliens were present at Capel Green. And subsequently, he came in for a lot of harassment. Well, what happened, getting back to the story, Larry and Adrian Bustinza were on the surface of the base. A sedan pulls up. These guys get out. These spooks get out, government agents. They spray Larry and Adrian with an aerosol. Now, I've heard about this kind of weapon before in a Milab context. This aerosol renders the victims listless. They lose all voluntary control of their muscles. So they spray Larry, they spray Adrian, and they both pretty much collapse. They throw Larry into the car. They throw Adrian into the car. And the way Larry was describing it, Adrian was screaming, was terrified, understandably. And in order to make him fit, they basically kicked him and tamped him down into the back of the car, slammed the door. They drove off over towards the photo processing center, which was an office, right? And then eventually they found themselves underground, okay? Because beneath this photo processing office is an underground tunnel entrance to the base beneath, right? And they were drugged out, harshly interrogated. They were threatened. And during the interrogation, it dawned on Larry, and I'm sure a lot of us had gone through a similar epiphany, that, and understand, he's coming from the perspective of an active duty Air Force security. See, there's two types of security personnel there at the time. Law enforcement, basically their job is they're military police. And then you have the special weapons protection side of the house, whose job it was to guard the nuclear weapons. That was Larry's side of the house, right? He was part of the table of organization responsible for guarding the nuclear weapons, right? And so he and Adrian were taken down there. They were harshly interrogated, drugged, and he suffered like 2 or 3 days of missing time. He didn't come out from underground till about like January 1st or 2nd, right? This incident happened on the 28th. So they hauled him down there for like at least 2 days and worked him over, right? So, and there was other aspects of it too, because later on, Larry was getting regressed by none other than Bud Hopkins, because Larry is a native New Yorker. And so, he knew kind of the scene over there, and he knew Bud Hopkins, so he got regressed. Get this, the regression tape disappeared. And how did it disappear? If memory serves, somebody who I won't name that used to be a colleague of Larry's, there was all these shady people that came into Larry's life later on, befriended him, like the aforementioned Russ Estes, what have you, that were actually government agents or disinfo agents or just ne'er-do-wells of one stripe or another. So what happened was that regression tape of Larry under regression by Bud Hopkins, and they specifically focus not only on the event on the surface, but underground. What came out in the regression was that Larry had stated under regression that he'd seen a number of other Air Force personnel under there with him that were laid out on tables or sitting around in a state of narco-hypnosis, right? So what he was saying was it wasn't only he and Adrian that got hauled down there and got drugged and harshly interrogated. It happened to a number of other people, and he mentioned them by name in the audio tape. That audio tape disappears, eventually winds up, if memory serves, with none other than Colonel Halt, right? So if anyone needs to undergo a polygraph test, it's Colonel Halt, who's been at the forefront of slandering and defaming and demonizing Larry all this time. Tell us, Colonel Halt, what happened to the tape? How come you don't talk about the encounter at Capel Green? How come you don't talk about the harassment meted out to all the personnel? I mean, that's something that touches me personally because I've been on the receiving end of being yelled and screamed at by military personnel and then, crumpled up into a corner on the floor while these buttheads were sitting there at a conference table having a discussion like I didn't even exist, right? So, I relate to this kind of thing. It affects me personally. I've been through similar things. So there's a lot more that I can talk about Capel Green. I really encourage the viewers to plug into the Rendlesham Forest because all the elements are there. There was missing time. A number of the personnel involved in the Capel Green incident suffered missing time afterwards. They were taken underground, right, by the military. And also, in all likelihood, there were alien abductions there. I've had Steve LaPlume on my show. He was one of the security personnel not involved at Capel Green, but he had his own UFO sightings, close UFO sightings, and in one of them, he had a missing time experience, right? And it was Steve LaPlume who told me he had a discussion with John Burroughs. John Burroughs was involved in the first couple of nights, actually. And John Burroughs told him he'd overheard Colonel Gordon Williams complaining about this Department of Energy presence there at Rendlesham, at Bentwaters. And it was beyond the control of the military. The Department of Energy was doing their own thing. Now, it must be noted that the Department of Energy used to be known as the Atomic Energy Commission. After World War II, the Manhattan Project was divided into two, essentially, components. There was the military side of the house, Armed Forces Special Weapons Project, based at Sandia Base, which later became the Sandia Corporation. That was headed up by General Leslie Groves, who was the military commander. He was an engineer for the Manhattan Project, and he wanted to retain the military's capability of assembling nuclear weapons. So he lobbied for the creation of what became known as the Armed Forces Special Weapons Project, underwent a number of name changes, Defense Special Weapons Agency, Defense Nuclear Agency, etc. The civilian component that branched off was the Atomic Energy Commission. Went through a number of name changes. We now know it as the Department of Energy. And they are deeply involved in this. The facility, the underground facility, Dulce, is a Department of Energy facility known as Section D. And from the earliest days of the Atomic Energy Commission, if you plug into some of the Majestic documents at the excellent majesticdocuments.com website, I've had Ryan Woods on my show, and we talked about this. Eyewitnesses, particularly from an interplanetary phenomenon unit that was there, went to Roswell like a day or two after all this happened. They identified, among others, Dr. Robert Oppenheimer at the debris field. And Oppenheimer would eventually become the chairman of the General Advisory Committee of the Atomic Energy Commission. So right off the bat, from the late 40s at least, the Atomic Energy Commission was involved in the analysis, evaluation, and back engineering of the technology. Fast forward to their current incarnation as the Department of Energy. There they are in, of all places, Rendlesham Forest, right? If this was all just some kind of lighthouse that was misidentified by all these trained personnel, we have other silly stories because they had to try to explain away all the deep indentations on the ground left by the craft. When the craft would land, it would have these the triangular landing gear, evenly spaced, highly radioactive. Well, they explained that away as like a rabbit's warren or some the silliest explanations you hear to explain all this away. But anyhow, just to wrap up about the Rendlesham aspect, I really encourage people to plug into it. There's so much there related to the ongoing connection between deep black elements of the military and aliens, the Department of Energy, missing time, narco-hypnosis of military personnel. It's all there. And just keep in mind, every time you see these ne'er-do-wells, the Nick Popes, a complete non-entity, you have people like Colonel Halt, Mr. Limited Hangout himself. All these people are there to keep a lid on it. But, get this also, one last thing because one of the people that emerged in the last few years into the UFO scene was Ross Coulthart, right?
Yeah,
And
he's big
he's
now, right?
interviewed, yeah, he's interviewed a number of these so-called whistleblowers. And I must say, for people like us, Robert, and some of our friends and colleagues, many of them that we hung out with at St. Pete a few weeks back, uh, this so-called disclosure has been lukewarm at best. Yes, I understand you're throwing us a bone, okay? And there's a lot of people in our field that says, "Oh no, they're really making progress and it's groundbreaking." I don't think so, because every time they would get to some kind of sensitive aspect, they would say, "Oh, let's scurry off to a skiff like the cockroaches we are." Right? A skiff is a sensitive, compartmented information facility where they store a lot of highly classified uh, information. So it reminded me of the Iran-Contra hearings. Every time something came up like FEMA or COG, continuity of government, oh no, we have to have the closed session for that. So what kind of disclosure is that? Well, you fast forward to the UFO disclosures. Every time something of a sensitive nature came up, oh, we have to talk about this in the skiff. Well, what kind of disclosure is that, right? If you have to go scurrying off away from the public eye, the public paying for all this with public money, right? So when you look at these whistleblowers that have come up, and Dark Journalist has done a great job about this. He's pointed out all these whistleblowers, Grush, etc., Elizondo, they're all connected to Christopher Mellon, the billionaire, right? And this reminds me of Robert Bigelow, another billionaire, CIA connected, who got his hooks into the Skinwalker Ranch, right? Bought the property around it, if memory serves, and kind of sealed it off, right? And he also played a role in NIDS, National. I forget what the acronym stood for, but it was this private, supposedly
near death studies, right? It was not NIDS was like near death. I think
it was like noetic something or other, had to do with study of strange phenomena, including near death experiences. But they were deeply involved in Skinwalker Ranch, and also one of the people they reeled in was none other than John Carpenter, who was the director of MUFON's alien abduction research, who'd personally regressed my friend Leah Haley. Leah Haley was on board an alien craft as an abductee when it was shot down by a directed energy weapon over near Eglin Air Force Base. And this came out under regression from John Carpenter, and Leah started talking about it. And then John Carpenter, behind her back, starts saying that never happened, right? Well, point of relevance is John Carpenter, on behalf of the MUFON Alien Abduction Research Center, had amassed all this private information from all these abductees, contact information, stories, testimony, regression tapes, and all of that eventually got passed over to the aforementioned Robert Bigelow, and Bigelow himself was a known CIA asset. So what's going on with Christopher Mellon, that's not even new to me because I've seen it before, right? So anyway, getting back to Ross Coulthart. Coulthart recently did this hit piece. Why did he do this hit piece, right? Because Colonel Halt called him up and basically read him the riot act. You're gonna get these guys on your show, and you're gonna basically insinuate that Larry is a liar, right? And he made all these journalistic weird facial expressions and kind of like seeming to try to corner and trying to put Larry on the spot. And Larry and Dion Johnson and Steve Longero, who was there also, they were just basically amused by the whole thing because it was clear that Ross Coulthart didn't know the whole story, right? So, and I tried to read Coulthart's book. I didn't get past really the second chapter because it was so boring and stupid. And then I'd flip through it to see, well, does this book get any better? And I kept seeing names like Elizondo and Grush and Mellon, and I said, this is a children's book. This is a children's book. It's got nothing to do with what's really going on. So it's clear to me that Coulthart is there as kind of the go-to guy for all these whistleblowers to make a beeline towards, and he would be their forum to the world. But what they've done is they've drawn a clear line of demarcation. There's like AD, like TikTok, and after it, and then nothing before that. The TikTok videos, and then everything that went after, or what they're saying that happened afterwards, but all the research that went on for decades before that, all the great work by the late, great Leonard Stringfield, the pioneer of UFO crash retrieval research, all the great research has come out, all the whistleblowing by Bob Lazar, Bill Uhouse, all these other people that were genuinely, Larry Warren, right, who was part of that. I give credit where credit's due, right? Not a big fan of Stephen Greer's, but he did put that National Press Club conference together where a number of whistleblowers, including Larry went up there and talked about having seen non-human beings at Rendlesham Forest. That was way back when. Larry stuck to his guns. His story has never changed, right? It has not changed all this time. So now Ross Coulthart has entered the fray, and then he's tied up with all these Elizondo types and Grush and all of them. That smacks to me of a limited hangout. They're never going to talk about alien abductions. They're never going to talk about human mutilations, cattle mutilations, the hybridization agenda, the off-world programs. So by its very definition, what we've seen out of Congress is a limited hangout. Of course, we're going to see a limited hangout. Why would they talk about off-world programs? Why would they talk about the back engineering? They're talking about the back engineering in a generic context, like everything is still experimental. You hear that a lot. Oh, they're testing the trying to make it work, trying to see. No, they're operational. We know they've been operational. They've been off-world. They've had these ongoing liaisons on the surface, underground, off-world with aliens, for lack of a better term, for decades now. So anyhow, see how it all ties in with Rendlesham and the cover-up and all this other stuff. So it has deep relevance to every one of us that's had these Milab type experiences. But anyway, I've spoken too much. Please, Robert, any direction you want to go?
I wanted to ask you about the binary code that they supposedly touched on. You know, or what do you think happened there? And also, do you think Burroughs and Peniston, their testimony has changed since they went on Art Bell back in the day? I think they just went on there in like 2015, you know, but but they weren't very, they didn't, from what I can remember, I would listen to them when I would go to sleep at night. So I can't remember much of what they talked about, but I mean, I do remember it was interesting for sure, yeah, I'm trying to remember what Burroughs talked about. Yeah, but I remember being the binary code was one thing though, right?
Yeah, that was Peniston, and honestly, like myself and some of the others that are deeply invested in this subject, we really don't know what to make of the Peniston claims about the binary code, whether it's a distraction or what, right? In Larry's book, Left at East Gate, from the very outset, Peniston was against Larry Warren. There was a part in the book where the morning after the events, the night shift, including Larry, they went over to the cafeteria. There was a buzz going on. The incoming personnel in the day shift, they knew something had happened at night because the night shift personnel had come in basically in a state of shock. There was a buzz going on. Larry started talking about some of the stuff that had gone on at Capel Green, and then Peniston pipes up from another table, "Hey, Warren, shut the F up," right? So, from the start, okay, he's a sergeant. Peniston was at the time. He's got a job to do, I guess, right? But he told Warren to shut up. Now, I don't think they were in the same chain of command. I think Peniston, if memory serves, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, he was in the law enforcement side of things, and Larry was on the security specialist side of things. But still, I guess he outranked Larry and told him to shut up. Point of relevance is, yes, he did that while he was on active duty, and yes, that happened right the night after all that stuff had happened. But it's clear from the start that Peniston had some kind of animus towards Larry. And then this whole story of the binary codes come out. Now, under regression, Peniston said he thought, and this is purely conjectural, okay? And it doesn't jibe with the eyewitness testimony of Bustinza and Larry and others. But under regression, and Peniston himself said that he was injected. he was taken and injected, and during the regression, if you saw the video, he pointed to his arm where he'd been injected. Now, this is something that happens again and again. Happened September 1977, Fort Benning, Georgia, where an entire battalion at parade formation at night, there was a mass alien abduction. A lot of the soldiers were immobilized, just stood there in parade formation, couldn't move. Others that did have the ability to move scattered in every direction. Some of them, including my friend John Vasquez, he since passed away, was hiding underneath one of the barracks when the aliens came and got him. Point of relevance is the next day, the Army psychologists showed up and started ejecting people, erasing memories. We've seen this over and over in these mass UFO events that happen at military bases. Well, the cleanup crew went to work at Rendlesham at RAF Bentwaters, and they'd ensnared Jim Peniston. Okay, shot him up with drugs and put him under narco hypnosis. And in the regression, he talked about getting the injection, but I have to wonder, was that whole thing about the binary codes that Jim Peniston said he got this download? If this is why it's important to delve into all aspects of the Rendlesham story, because in the was it the first or the second night? But at any rate, the night that Peniston got directly involved, John Burroughs was directly involved in the first night, but I believe in the second night, that was when Peniston had came across a landed small obsidian black craft in a small clearing in the forest. He actually touched it, walked around it, drew sketches of it, and he showed the sketches out of his notebook later on in documentaries. And he said somehow during this process, either at the time or later, he started getting all these downloads. Now, we know from an alien abductee perspective that happens. And I mentioned earlier that there was missing time there. There was personnel getting abducted by aliens at RAF Bentwaters. So it wasn't just sightings. It just wasn't a landed craft surrounded by military personnel. There were people that were being abducted by aliens and also abducted by the military, right? So he was part of the dragnet of the cleanup crew, got drugged and got debriefed. And it's a question, and I can only speculate. Is it possible he was given this binaural code story by whoever his handlers were, right?
It reminds me of what happened to Terry Lovelace. Like Terry Lovelace had that incident in Devil's Den, and he might have been abducted, and then he was I've had him on my show a couple times. He was taken under by the military, and he was given I think it was called sodium amytal or something like that, and he just remembers being under a fog, and he couldn't. It was like they do that. That was like the MO back in the day, right? There was
sodium amytal has been used many times. Pentothal, but also amytal has been used against abductees in Milabs for many years. And also that aerosol spray that I described, one of the early female Milabs that came forward in California, Leisha Davidson, I don't even know if she's still on this side of the veil, that happened to her. These military personnel barged into her house. They sprayed her with an aerosol can. She described kind of a citrusy smell. It rendered her listless. She fell to the ground, and they hauled her away. So what Larry described, that happened years before what happened to Leisha Davidson, right? So how did Larry know about such a small, nuanced detail about the aerosol used? And they use different methods. They'll use like cattle prods and other things, to jolt and shock Milabs and abductees. But how did Larry know about the aerosol spray when I only found out about that years later in the mid-late 90s when Leisha Davidson was talking about it, right? So that's another data point that people have to consider. But getting back to Jim Peniston, his testimony is valuable insofar as he, in one of the nights prior to the big event, he stood alongside of a craft. He touched it. He drew sketches of it. And under regression, he was asked who these entities were. And this is purely coming from Peniston now. This is not my perspective or anyone else's perspective. He thought that these particular aliens that were involved in the forest there were humans that had come back from the future. I don't think so, because humans that come back from the future wouldn't show up in these little illuminated balls and little tiny beings with, you know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
people have described different types of ETs there. Lori Rayfelt, who retired as a major in the Air Force, she was on guard duty in a remote part of the perimeter there, and she saw a mantis being. And there was children. This was in 2016, 2017 timeframe. They're there walking, skipping along this country lane out there in Rendlesham Forest, and they see these tall white aliens with kind of, like the backward leg looking thing, the lower extremity of the leg, kind of like in the movie The Arrival, where the alien has that kind of backward dog's hawk kind of leg thing. Some of the dogmen have been described with a similar anatomical feature. Well, these aliens, these tall white aliens with big eyes, and they had this backward leg feature. And then the kids saw these aliens shrink up into a little white spherical balls of light, and then they just went off in different directions. Point being is that it's not just Larry and the Air Force personnel that night that saw aliens. It's other people, right? It's citizens, civilians have seen aliens there. So when Pennison says, "Oh well, these are humans from the future," maybe, maybe not. I'm kind of doubtful about that. So to get back to your question, I don't know what to make of the binaural codes that were allegedly downloaded into Pennison, and I have to question the totality of Penniston's testimony, because he's been adamant and he's been against Larry, and he's been defaming Larry along with the rest of them. So that, to me, it makes at least some of his testimony questionable, to say the least. But anyway.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, and Stone Hobbit's in the chat. She says she knows the scent of that spray. She says it says oranges with a hint of chemical.
Oh, who's this?
Stone Hobbit.
Oh, Stony. I love you. I love you. Stony is she's a dear friend of mine. She's down in New Zealand. I'm getting chills thinking about this. She's one of us. And geez, I didn't know that happened to you, Stony. Let's talk about that sometime. But yeah, they use it against us Milabs and us abductees.
Yeah. So I have two questions about the film. Now, how did you get involved with the film? And then I guess this was supposed to be delayed, or it got delayed because of COVID or whatever. Like they were going to release it in or maybe they started working on it in 2017 or 2020 or.
Well, it was 8 years in the making, and
wow.
You know how it is with these kinds of projects. Delays. There's all kinds of issues that come up. Different personnel involved in the production effort. They have their challenges, life intervenes, et cetera, et cetera. So, it was 8 years in the making, and finally it was done. And I think that Dion could be destiny, could be fate. I think it came out just at the right time, because it came out on the heels of all these faux congressional hearings. So here we are now with Capel Green, and boom, it's like, all they can do is, wring their hands, wail and gnash their teeth about Rendlesham and about Larry Warren, but it's too late. The cat's out of the bag, because you see in the documentary the results of, I'm not going to give it away, spoiler alert, but you can see the results of Larry's polygraph. He was tested by one of the world's leading authorities, one of the world's leading experts on giving polygraphs. Okay. So, and I challenge Colonel Halt. I challenge all of you that have been, talking trash about Larry all this time. You get a polygraph test, and I'll write the questions. Okay. And let's see how that plays out, because Colonel Halt has a lot to answer for. Granted, he's getting a pension. Granted, he's still on a leash. I understand that. But for him to continue with these vicious attacks, completely unbecoming of an officer and a gentleman, is not how an officer, retired officer of the United States Air Force, is supposed to behave, right? And I've been around, military people in different parts of my life. There's a certain decorum. There's a certain amount of class that they need to exhibit if they're going to wear that uniform or be a retired member representing still the government in the Air Force. So if you're out there, Colonel, you need to be polygraphed. and I'll write the questions.
Yeah. Now, you've spoken a lot about Milabs. Do you see Rendlesham as a test site for military abductions or even more alien abductions or psychic experiments?
Well, that was another aspect because Larry, when he was drugged and taken underground, he was stood before this big screen, lack of a better term, a screen, and behind the screen was a silhouette. Whether it was a human, whether it was an alien, we don't know. But he started getting telepathic messages that really didn't come out in the documentary because Dion had to get it down to 4 hours, right? I mean, originally it was 6 hours. It was never going to be shown in any cinema in the world if it was a 6 hour long movie. But they shrunk it down. They had to cut out a lot of stuff and got it down to just under 4 hours. So now it's in bite-sized chunks. It could be a 4-part miniseries and a streaming channel, and they're trying to work out these deals to make that happen. Hopefully that comes to pass. But Larry didn't talk about this in a documentary, or at any rate, if he did talk about it, it was left on the cutting room floor. And what I know from the past, and my discussions with Larry, and the story, when he was underground, he was stood in front of a screen, and behind the screen was a silhouette of some being, human, alien, we don't know. But if memory serves, it started talking to him telepathically. Could this have been voice to skull? It's possible. Could this have been a result of some military psychic behind the screen sending him these telepathic messages? That's possible. Is it an alien behind the screen? It's possible. Because I've spoken to other people who had a similar experience and were taken underground or taken off world, and they were, stood in front of a screen, and behind the screen was a silhouette of some being talking to them. So what Larry describes, similar to the testimony of the aerosol spray, this is what the great researcher Bill Hamilton called pattern data correlations, right? Little nuanced facts that nobody can make up or even think about. So what Larry described has been described by others. And also, if memory serves too, and I'm going by memory on this, and I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, someone correct me. But if memory serves, and I guess Larry would have to confirm this with me, he saw some of those craft underground also. So that's a whole nother can of worms, because if some of those craft that he's seen on the surface were also underground, that would speak of collusion between certain deep black elements on the surface at Rendlesham and rather Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge, because it's two sister bases side by side with the Rendlesham Forest in the middle. Okay, if there were craft underground,
Wow.
that tells me that there's this ongoing collusion between, which would not even be unusual, as you know, in the when you zoom out and you see similar patterns at Edwards Air Force Base, Groom Lake, Pine Gap, other type places. We know this happens, so it's quite possible something similar has happened at Bentwaters.
I was going to say, have there been any incidents afterwards, or was it just that one incident? Or
Yes.
Anybody anything happening?
Well, there were other people afterwards, long afterwards, that had experiences there, and then there was also this strange weather weapon deployment, which knocked down like huge swaths, acres of these pine trees. Right. This is why Dion Johnson had to film some of the scenes in Mount Gambier, South Australia, where he's from, and where we had that screening recently. I attended and gave a short speech afterwards, because oddly enough, as fate would have it, some of the trees there in Mount Gambier were identical to the trees in Capel Green in the Rendlesham Forest, but because some weird weather weapon had been deployed, my guess it was a weather weapon possibly in 1987, had flattened, so many trees, kind of knocked them all over like 10 pins. Well, obviously he couldn't film there anymore because they'd since planted different types of trees. So he wanted to make it as realistic as possible, and lo and behold, in his old stomping grounds where he grew up, they have the same kind of trees, right? So, yes, people have described things there for centuries, and then thereafter, there's still things going on. And even if the bases have been shut down, I don't think that alien base has gone away. It's probably still there. The aliens would
Well,
have no compelling reason to leave.
yeah, yeah. What do you think's going on underground, James? Like totally. Do you envision this is what I'm seeing. This is, I mean, because like Gene Decode's talked about. Like I've been asking a lot of people about this. Like Gene Decode's talked about that there's maglev trains that connect everything underground. So I'm imagining deep underground military bases that are all connected throughout the United States. Then even lower, maybe some form of the more government working with aliens, then lower inner earth civilizations of like aliens, like that we've heard about, that do you think it's that extensive and do you think it's really well populated down there?
Yes, I think
Aliens
that there's. Yes, I think that there are a number of advanced, semi-advanced, different stages of advancement, civilizations, societies down there, various types of beings, some quite human-looking. One of my friends, Lorena Smith, she was in the same naval intelligence program as me. She's been taken off world. She's been taken to Mars. She's been taken to alternate realities. She was also taken in a submersible device that's probably not on the table of organization for the regular U.S. Navy. We know that they have the, NR-1, which was developed by Naval Research years ago as a nuclear-powered deep submersible. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about something much more high tech that looked kind of more like a bubble kind of looking thing, submersible, and it was used to take her and naval personnel deep underwater to a domed city at the ocean floor where naval intelligence introduced Lorena to these humans down there. They were dressed in gowns, very advanced society, high tech, with a very disdainful attitude, understandably, uh, towards us, the surface population. They basically thought, probably with some degree of justification, that we're scum, right? So, they didn't really want to deal with naval intelligence and just kind of, okay, it's you guys again, kind of thing. Point being is that that's an example of a underwater civilization existing on the ocean bed beneath some kind of domed force field kind of thing, right? And also beneath the ocean floors, we know that there's alien bases, and these maglevs you talk about, they're transcontinental. You can get on a maglev, say at like some underground facility in the continental U.S., and it'll zip you along to some other country, Europe or Australia or the Far East or something. And also, getting back to your question about the subterranean civilizations, if one delves into the older books, and I was talking to Dion Johnson and others about this, the treasure trove that we still have, if you can find them, of the older books. Uh, and a lot of the older books talk about these subterranean civilizations. What's been described as the first work of science fiction, written by Edward Bulwer Lytton, who was an English parliamentarian in the 18th century, wrote a book called The Coming Race, which I used to have. This coming race was an underground civilization called the Vrilya. Doesn't that sound familiar? Vrilya, right?
Yeah.
And the opening scene, the very first page of the book, these two guys are what we call spelunking now. I used to do that back in the day, crawl into reptilian strongholds like at Black Mountain outside of Henderson, Nevada. That's a whole other story. But the story starts where a younger guy is being taken by an older miner to go like cave exploring, spelunking. And as they're going down into the tunnel system, the older guy falls down into the tunnel and lands splat, right? And the younger guy is looking down at the tunnel entrance. Geez, what am I going to do? How am I going to get him up here? Next thing you know, and remember, this book was written like in the 18th century. Next thing you know, this reptilian creature comes out, grabs the guy laying there, the miner, and hauls him away. Okay, that's how the book starts. And then the guy crawls down in there after a while. Long story short, he eventually makes contact with a human-looking race called the Vrilya, who, and the reason why the book was called The Coming Race was they told him eventually they're going to come up to the surface and reclaim what they regard as theirs. Okay? Kind of ominous, but considering what we know about underground civilizations. And what they seem to have done is there's this pre-existing enormous cavern system underground. And you have societies of entities, of civilizations down there. And then you probably have just weird critters that, mate with one another, and they could be solitary in their existence, or they could live in small groups, or we don't know. But we can only postulate based on what we see on the surface with certain animals, right? There's seldom only one type of animal. Basically, you can infer that if you see one type of creature, there's probably more of them, but we don't really have a sense of what their civilization or society would be like. But we know that in these deep underground cavern systems, there are civilizations some are quite advanced, and there are reptilians down there, different types of reptilians. And this warfare, it extends in all directions. Some of the reptilian races in the underground cavern systems enslave other reptilians and make them work for them. David Eckhart, who I've had on my show on a few occasions, he's talked about when he's been underground in the reptilian bases, he sees these other slave races. It's not only, sadly, unfortunately, and we got to do something about this, not only does he see human captives down there, human children held in captivity, cages, and enslaved, used as pets, the way David Eckhart described it. Some of these highly prized children are basically used as prized pets. They teach them how to do tricks and what have you. Like they're like show ponies. But he also described seeing other types of entities that were likewise enslaved by the ruling reptilians, including other reptilians, right? So there's these ongoing conflicts, and what seems to have happened in some cases, whether by design, inadvertently, whatever the case may be, we know that a lot of the construction of military sites harkens back to actually the ancient temple builders and megalithic structure builders who tended to build these things atop ley lines and vortex areas. Well, lo and behold, the military, for whatever reason, synchronistically, seems to build a lot of their military facilities over power centers, over vortex areas, over energy ley line grids, right? And beneath these military bases, they develop their own underground bases, and often times, beneath the underground bases are these cavern systems, which the military bases can connect to, right? And these cavern systems some of them are well populated with entire societies of different types of beings. The naval facility I was frequently taken to in the 1990s, early 2000s in Apple Valley, California, near Victorville. I told the story before, it bears repeating. It's beneath a mountain. I guess eminent domain didn't work, so they simply burned off all the homesteaders along the summit, along the sides of the mountain. They burned them off, right, with a fire. The first fire units to arrive came from Fort Irwin Army Base, federal firefighting unit, right, was the first to show up, not the local fire department, mind you, but 60 miles away from Fort Irwin. And then basically they burned off everyone from the surface because part of that mountain, like other similar mountains, like right outside of Las Vegas, for example, part of the mountain opens up and craft fly in and out of it, right? So I was taken inside that facility on numerous occasions, and there are parts of that facility that are set aside for reptilians. And the reptilians have their own part of the facility, and beneath that are these tunnel systems. And we see something similar with malls. Many of us have gone through training or abductions in what appear to be, sometimes I think they're simulated to look like shopping malls at night, complete with a food court and everything. And I think that oftentimes they are shopping malls, because beneath these shopping malls, I'm not going to get into the names of some of these corporations that own a lot of these shopping malls, but a lot of them have a shady intelligence security connection, right?
Would it be like
And
BlackRock? I'll just say it. Would it be like BlackRock probably
well,
or something like
BlackRock would own definitely a lot of these malls, BlackRock and Vanguard. But the subsidiary corporations, I'll just leave it at that. Some of these malls go by well-known names, and some of the owners of these malls are definitely intelligence connected. But anyway, beneath these malls, likewise, are tunnel systems, right? Big enough where these 18-wheeler big rigs can be driven in and out of them, right? So you have malls, you have the tunnel systems beneath the malls, and who knows what's beneath that. Like in, I think it's Crossroads Plaza. They used to have a mall in Salt Lake City. And some of your viewers that are from that area may be able to help me with this. My details are kind of fuzzy over the years, but some of the night staff at this mall, they've since closed it down, were having problems because, like, the cleaning staff and the security staff, they would see reptilians come up onto the surface in the mall at night, right, and harass them. And also, a guy I've had on my show before, in the lead up to Hurricane Katrina, we know what happened there. They blew out the locks and flooded the lower Ninth Ward and diverted Katrina. When it was headed out to sea, they made it come back. It's a whole nother story. Point of relevance was in the weeks leading up to Katrina, he and presumably other Milabs were taken to malls at night by, and if memory serves, elements of what appeared to be National Guard, more likely intelligence, people embedded into the National Guard, and were trained in these malls. And the trainers included reptilian trainers. And we've heard this before, where some of our numbers, some of our MyLab friends were being trained. One of the gals I knew, she's since passed away. Her primary handler, she called Mike. And when Mike was standing there in military uniform, he looked like a normal human. Thing was, he shapeshifted into a reptilian. And he trained her in military tactics. And so what the guy told me that I've had on my show, he went by like a pseudonym, my name escapes me at the moment, but they were trained by elements of law enforcement, and we know intelligence has embedded themselves in law enforcement for so long now. Likewise, they've embedded themselves in the National Guard units, and also present were reptilians, and they were being trained in things like crowd control, what have you, right? And this was in the weeks leading up to Katrina. So it cycles back to the concept about malls. So many of us, myself included, we'd find ourselves in what appeared to be a deserted mall at night. And sometimes I'd find myself in a food court, or what looks like a food court. And sometimes they get tricky, the aliens do, when they abduct you. You'll be in some huge craft and they'll play around with your perceptions to the point where you look around and it seems like you're like in this really big multi-story mall, but no, it's a big installation or it's a big craft. So they play with our memories in some ways, but definitely malls factor into this, and it all cycles back to your original question about the underground cavern systems. Michael Mott wrote this great book about the underground civilizations, worlds, and what's been reported down through the ages, through antiquity. And we know the story, Shambhala, Shangri-La, Mount Shasta, all these other places. They exist. They've always existed. And if memory serves, Lou Elizondo, the guy that was in that children's book written by Ross Coulthart, when he was asked about underground bases, he made a dismissive comment about them. Right? How could I take the guy seriously if he makes a dismissive comment about underground bases when the Royal Air Force bombed Pienemunde, the island in the Baltic Sea there, where the Germans were testing the V1 and V2 rockets? They killed a whole bunch of technicians and scientists in the project. They had to move the V2 missile project to an underground base in the Harz Mountains of Germany near Nordhausen, and they created what was known as the Mittelwerke. Right, it was a huge underground installation where they built the V2 missiles that were raining down on London. right? And after the war, all these Army technicians, U.S. Army technicians, they went in there and they basically cleaned the place out before the Russians can get to it. So, I mean, that's basic mainline history. So when Elizondo makes a dismissive comment about underground base, it's like, why would I even take you seriously when you say such silly things?
Yeah, I think Elizondo made some like a nasty comment about Milabs too.
Of
Which
course
is
he would.
because he's a government agent. You know what I mean?
Of course he is.
He's definitely a government agent.
He's what they call, he's on a leash. He's on a leash. He responds to control.
Sorry,
Oh,
I heard people call him Lou Shilizondo.
Well, I'll tell you what he reminds me of, okay? Another highly sensitive subject. There's about 3 or 4 subjects back in the day, and probably to this day, that'll get somebody bumped off if they start delving into things too seriously, right? And one of them back in the day was the issue of MIAs, missing in action, POWs left over from the war in Southeast Asia, not just Vietnam, but Laos, Cambodia, North Vietnam, etc., right? And that delves into a whole I mean, you go clear back to the Korean War. There were a great many Americans who disappeared when they were captured by the communist Chinese and the North Koreans. But getting back to the MIA issue, when the great Bo Grites, you have all these podcasters out there, ex-special forces guys that do these podcasts nowadays. They never ever talk about Colonel Bo Grites, probably with good reason. Or either never heard of him, or have been told not to talk about him, because he was a living legend from the Vietnam War. He commanded Mike Force, a mobile strike company, and after the war, he was tasked by the Intelligence Support Activity (ISA), a highly secretive unit within the Pentagon, and it was funded by Ross Perot, who was kind of like an early version of Ron Paul kind of, and Ross Perot funded this operation where Bo Grites led a team into Southeast Asia. They kind of fictionalized this with the Gene Hackman movie, a very good movie called Uncommon Valor. So Bo Grites led a team to Southeast Asia to find evidence of missing in action MIAs, right? Well, he found not only that, but he found all these connections with the international drug trafficking involving the CIA, Theodore Shackley, longtime CIA spook, Santos Traficante Jr. They were all running these drug trafficking operations over there in Southeast Asia, and Bo Grites, definitely found proof that MIAs have been left behind. Now, the point of relevance with Elizondo is whenever the government would, try to explain away all the missing MIAs, the spokesman always had Anne Griffith Mills standing next to him. Sad story, her brother was an MIA in the Vietnam War, and her job, Anne Griffith Mills, was to stand there next to the spokesliar to explain away all the MIAs, and her job was to stand there, look downwards, and have a mournful expression on her face. Right? And I'm not being dismissive of the personal heartbreak of losing her brother. Okay, I'm not that calloused, but that was her job. She doesn't say anything. She just, here's Anne Griffith Mills, president of the MIA, chapter society in America. We're really concerned about this, and look at her. Look at how sad she is. And then when I look at Lou Elizondo, I see the same expression. Oh, UAPs. It's so serious. It's so serious. I really can't talk about it. You got to go into a skiff. We want to talk about it. So serious. Yeah, right. You don't know the half of it, pal. Any one of my MyLab friends know far more about this than you do, right? Anyway, please continue.
No, we got some really good comments. We got one from Stone Hobbit. I figured maybe before we finish up, we could just go through some good comments. I have about maybe 15, 20 minutes. This one's from Stone Hobbit. She says, could get interesting when alien shapeshifting is connected with the Yowie, werewolf, and balls of light.
Oh, absolutely. The werewolves, and I'm glad more and more people are talking about that. Josh Turner is the best in my book. And like Larry Warren, Josh is just getting so much harassment. Josh and his whole family, he's over at Paranormal Roundtable. He's done so much great work about.
I love that show. It's a good
Oh, you
show.
are?
He's a big guy, right? That
Oh yeah,
like
he's a
a
big guy.
yeah,
Yeah, he's
I
a
like
great
his
guy.
show. He
Oh,
talks a
it's a
lot
great
about the
show.
Dogman, right?
Dogmen, vampires. I mean, you name it. Anything kind of paranormal. Josh does it. And getting back to the werewolves and the dogmen, I'm satisfied that deep black elements of the military, corporate uh, structure, have some involvement with what we call dogmen and werewolves, because I've spoken to people that have personal encounters with dogmen dressed or werewolves dressed in military uniforms.
I've
My
heard
friend
about
Pam
this.
Hamilton, yeah, Pam Hamilton was accosted. She had been getting she lived within sight of an underground facility beneath the Tehachapi Mountain in Southern California, and the military come and harass her and beat her up, and similar to what happened to Alicia Davidson and Leah Haley and some of the other early female Milabs that are talking about this in the 90s. And she was warned not to talk about her experiences, and then she got involved with Bill Hamilton and eventually married him. So yeah, they told her not to talk, but then she winds up marrying one of the top researchers. But anyway, on one occasion at night, this dog man showed up at her house wearing a military uniform and said to her in growly English, "We told you, Pamela, not to talk about this or there'll be consequences." Words to that effect. So that was a dog man slash werewolf speaking in English. And we can only speculate. I believe that these dogman beings have been around all along. They probably don't originate on our planet. They probably have come elsewhere. There may have been like a native Terran version of the dogmen, right? But I'm satisfied that some of them have come from other worlds, Sirius, what have you. And the Anubis creature, the Anubis dogman that's been described by Linda Godfrey and others, that came up in a discussion I had recently also about people seeing these Anubis-looking beings, which wouldn't be surprising. But the balls of light are interesting because some of the Yowies, that's what people in Australia and New Zealand call Sasquatch, some of these Yowies definitely have the ability to uh, manifest into light phenomena. They're definitely, some of them definitely metaphysically orientated. They can appear, disappear, they can teleport, they can make things manifest right in front of you, like marbles could appear right in front of your eyes and then drop to the ground, et cetera, et cetera. And increasingly, they're showing up in urban environments. Mike Patterson, who I've had on my show, I believe Mike implicitly, he's been under a lot of attack also. And he says he lives in a built up suburb in Ontario somewhere, Canada, and he says he'll experience uh, metaphysical phenomena from the Sasquatch tribe he's been involved in. It'll happen right in his house, and he lives in the suburbs, right? So these
Wow.
beings can come right into, and then the balls of light thing also. Now, what's been reported going way back to the 90s and the 80s in the underground bases are what they call spy bees. These are illuminated balls. I don't know if they're really orbs, but they're illuminated balls, which are unusual because they give off a long light, a bright light, but the surrounding uh, the surrounding features, walls, etc., don't reflect that light. Very strange. It kind of defies known light physics, light phenomena. Something so bright, but you don't see the light cast on the walls. And these spy bees, they call them spy bees because they are seen going up and down the corridors of these underground bases. They can go through solid objects, go through walls, right? So that's been described. Now, is it a monitoring device? I've had John John on my show. I didn't want to say his pseudonym last name because I might have given his real name, but let's just call him John, right? He says some of these orbs that he's seen, and he's a MyLab. He's been off world, uh, etc. He says that some of these orbs that have come to him are from an alternate reality entirely. There's some kind of military operation going on in some alternate reality which interlinks with our own, right? I think at some level there is some kind of linkage between the alternate reality, the military personnel, and our counterparts in alternate realities with us here in the now, right? And what happens with John is these orbs would show up, and then these orbs would try to manipulate him emotionally in some way, and sometimes these orbs would like pull him into them, and then it would be like a whole nother reality, and he'd be interacting with these military personnel, but from an alternate reality, right? So I mean, it gets very deep. So when Elizana makes these dismissive comments, "Oh, Milabs, STFU, you don't know what you're talking about." If he walked into the room, I wouldn't even look at him. We wouldn't even take him seriously.
Yeah, and this is a really interesting comment from Karen McDonald. I think you know Karen. She's a quantum health. She's a clan mother, but
I've
Canada.
I've met Karen before. Yeah.
She says, geez, I have 200 bunker maps per province in Canada, even let alone dumb known lists and others via Doc Ram, Dr. Richard Allen Miller. That's cool. I'd love to see those. Maybe we could do a show on that, Karen, or maybe you could go on James' show or something. That would be
Yes.
that would be, I'd love to see those, because James, one of the topics I'm really fascinated is inner Earth. I mean, I'm more interested. I want to know what's going on underneath us. I really do. I really want to know. I'd love to see it. I remember that old Art Bell episode where that kid was going to take this helicopter type. It was like a mini helicopter, and he was going to try to fly it into inner Earth. He thought he knew where an entrance was, but then he disappeared. He wrote this. He wrote this book. His name was Dallas Thompson. And he wrote a book and stuff, and his book's still on Amazon, but nobody can find the guy. He just totally went off the map, which is weird. I don't know.
Well, that happens to some people. I mean, even in the Admiral Harley Bird story, talking about, and not just Antarctica, but about the North Pole, where there's a large inner Earth entrance in the North Pole, and explorers, sometimes intentionally or inadvertently, go flying into it or walking into it, and then suddenly the flora and fauna changes. It starts becoming warmer. You're supposed to be in the North Pole, but you're starting to see vegetation. You're starting to see animals, right? So, yes, I think that the inner Earth is key behind all of this, and there is something to the notion of the Earth being hollow to some degree. Now, I've done some research on the concept of to use Dr. Joseph, his name escaped, Joseph Farrell's term, paleo-ancient. I like that term, actually, when he talks about the paleo-ancient cosmic war that happened in the solar system. But I also use it in relation to these giant trees. And people scoff at this, right? But when I look at these buttes, plateaus, mountaintops, right? What I see are huge petrified tree stumps, because the features you see on a tree, an average normal sized tree, and the features you see in these buttes, these plateaus, they're scale invariant. What seem like ridge lines along the sides of these plateaus, those are root systems. And those root systems, not only do the trees go up like a mile or more into the sky, some of them, and understand that some intelligence, some advanced alien civilization or Atlantean civilization or someone came along almost with a giant chainsaw and sawed these things off at the base, right? And then if you look at the root systems, these root systems from such gigantic trees would create lava tubes, because the deeper they go, eventually they're going to hit that segment of the inner Earth where there's the magma layer, and then the magma would go up these root systems. Anyone who's had problems with plumbing because of a root system from a big tree knows what I'm talking about, right? The roots will eventually get into the plumbing, the sewage system, clog it all up. Then you got to pay hundreds of dollars to get a plumber to come in and fix it up. Well, with these giant trees, the root systems go so far down into the inner Earth, they get to the magma layer, and then it causes the magma to come to the surface and become lava. This is how we have volcanoes. Okay, so look at every single volcano. It looks like one of these giant tree stumps, right? You look at Mexico City, where flying saucers are flying in and out of this volcano in particular. There's one volcano that comes to mind that's not too far from Mexico City, if memory serves, right? They use it as a base to get into the inner Earth. So the lava tubes create the root systems from these gigantic trees create some of the tunnel systems in the cavern systems. Okay.
Wow, wow, wow. This was amazing, James. This was amazing. And I was going to say, if you want to upload this on your channel, I can send you the file later or something.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah, this was
Yeah,
amazing.
but just a quick point about the giant paleo ancient trees. It's about scale and variance. Look at the features of a normal sized tree stump, and then look at all these countless huge plateaus around the world. They look like, for all the world, like giant tree stumps because that's what they are. They're petrified giant tree stumps. And then you look at the petrified creatures. In Australia, there is a mountain that looks for all the world like a giant yowie sitting down. Well, that's because
Wow.
it is a giant yowie sitting down, and some kind of cataclysm had occurred, which basically petrified it on the spot. There's a cave system in Thailand where there's a gigantic, what seems to be a gigantic petrified snake, right, with scales and everything, and a head and everything. And then the geologists like contort themselves in all kinds of weird positions to try to explain this away as some kind of natural rock formation using all kinds of geological mumbo jumbo, which doesn't make any sense, right? So when you look at the possibility, which I think really happened, of a formerly giant planet in our solar system getting blown up, depending on who you talk to, Tiamat, Maldek, etc. Well, it's possible some of the like seeds, tree seeds, pods, what have you, that were ejected off that planet that was blown up, made its way here, took root, and turned into giant trees, right? And also the possibility exists that before that planet was destroyed, some of the giant creatures there had made their way here somehow, were transported here, whatever the case may be, because there were giants on this earth. And I'm not talking 10, 15-foot tall giants like the Kandahar giant. I'm talking about gigantic giants. A lot of your older viewers remember this TV show from the 60s. I remember it. It was called Land of the Giants. This small group of humans, they were like this big. They wound up in this world somehow. I got to go back and watch that show. But there were like normal humans there in a normal human society, but they were all giants, you see. So when you see these giant, like planet-sized or larger craft in front of the sun, that's why like no one I know in our field takes this Atlas incoming craft seriously, because of everything we've already gone through, and also because the Soho Sun Observatory has imaged many times gigantic, sometimes dozens at one time, gigantic planet-sized or larger craft in front of the sun, because the sun is a big interdimensional portal, among other things, right? So, we're talking about scale and variant. How big are the creatures on board those craft, right? You really want to blow your mind? How big is big? How small is small? You really want to get down to it, right?
Wow.
Like stars like Betelgeuse, they would dwarf our solar system. It's like the outer planets, you know, some of those suns out there are so big they would literally fill up our solar system. Okay, but we're talking about scale here. Okay, just to keep that in mind.
Wow, that's fascinating. Wow, we could do a whole show on that. We should probably, Well, yeah, this is amazing, James. Do you want to tell people where they can find you? And thanks so much, man. I always enjoy our shows; they're amazing. We got a
Yeah,
lot of
sorry that I didn't get into like all my own experiences. I was, yammering on about other things, but you can find it on the Cosmic Switchboard show. What's that?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I said we can do next month if you want. If you want to do another
Yeah,
one.
yeah, let's do that. Do that. Just keep me on track and say, "Shut up, James," and get back on the topic. Thank you for having me on again, Robert. And it was such a pleasure hanging out with you and Nathan and everyone else. Susan Long, all these really, really cool people. Some of these people look so bloody familiar. I'm telling you, like David Purcell stuck out like a sore thumb. Daryl James looked very familiar to me, right? And so it was just a pleasure getting around these people because they're winners, they're survivors. They didn't let all this, corrupt them. And, I mean, we're all dealing with trauma at some level. But it's amazing to me how some of these people, despite all the crap they've had to endure, uh, how much they've held it together, and they're such an inspiration to me to be able to go through all those experiences, hold it together, and still be very decent human beings. That to me, it's easy to become embittered. It's easy to withdraw into a shell and become very insular and not want to talk to anybody. So hats off to all these people. It was really a pleasure and an honor to be rubbing shoulders with them. But anyway, thecosmicswitchboard.com. You can also find me on YouTube. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter, and I'd be glad to interact with some of your viewers. You've been a guest, well, rather, I've been on a guest on your show on a number of occasions. So, I feel like, we're old friends basically, and it's always a pleasure and a privilege for me to be a guest on your show. So thanks again.
All right, and thanks everybody. And I'll be live with Miles in a few minutes. So Miles Johnson's up next, and thank you, James, and
give Miles my regards.
Yeah, and this was awesome, James. This was one of the best shows, but I think we did. Yeah, this was. I mean, they're always really good. They're all real good, but this was amazing. Yeah, and thank you, everybody. I'll see you guys in a few minutes. All right, good night, everybody.